The steel shears felt cold and heavy. They were not for needlepoint. They were for shearing sheep. Stolen from the carriage house, Clara Whitmore watched her own reflection in the dark glass of the Boston window. Rain lashed the pane, blurring the gaslights of the street below, turning the world to a watercolor of browns and grays. She took the first lock, thick and the color of dark honey. She pulled it taut. Her hand did not shake. The shears made a sound like a wet cough. Snip. The hair coiled on the polished mahogany floor. It looked like a dead thing. She was 23 years old. She was the daughter of Richard Whitmore, a man who measured the world in tons of steel and lengths of railroad track. To him, she was another possession, his finest one, to be polished, displayed, and bartered for a suitable alliance. Another lock fell. Snip. The air in the room was tight, smelling of beeswax and old money. She was suffocating on it. She had been suffocating for 2 years, ever since the mountain. The memory was not a gentle thing. It came with the phantom smell of pine and ice, and the sharp, burning pain in her shoulder, a blizzard in the Rockies, a foolish ride taken against her father's orders, the thunder of snow, white oblivion. Then, a cabin, rough wood, the smell of wood smoke and wet leather. A man's voice, low and steady, cursing the storm. He had pulled her from the drift. He had set her by the fire. He had given her hot, bitter coffee and wrapped her in a heavy quilt that smelled of bacon grease and horse. She had been delirious with cold and pain. Her shoulder scraped raw where the ice had torn her riding habit. She remembered his hands. They were not soft. They were scarred and cracked, the nails rimmed with dirt. They had been gentle as they probed her shoulder, firm as they applied a rough bandage. He had asked her name. She had whispered it. He had given his James Mackenzie. He had looked at her not as a porcelain doll, not as a Whitmore, but as a problem of survival, a human thing that needed warmth and shelter. For 2 days, he had kept the storm at bay. When it broke, he had ridden to the nearest settlement, miles down the mountain, and returned with a doctor. Then her father arrived. Richard Whitmore had descended like a steel press. He had paid the doctor. He had paid the man from the settlement. He had offered James Mackenzie money, which the man had refused with a quiet, level stare. Clara had been bundled back to Boston. The newspapers were forbidden to print a word. The doctor, under threat of ruin, had signed a statement attesting to a minor travel delay. Her father had scrubbed the incident from history. But he could not scrub the scar from her shoulder, and he could not scrub the name from her mind. James Mackenzie, a widower, he had said, his voice flat with a recent grief, a settler, trying to scratch a life from hard land. He had mentioned a friend, Chaska, a Lakota man who knew the high plains better than any map. Clara cut the last lock of hair. It fell short and uneven, ragged around her ears. She looked like a boy, or a field hand. She looked, for the first time, like herself. She stripped off the silk dressing gown. Underneath, she already wore the disguise, a gray wool dress, patched at the elbow, stiff and scratchy, a maid's uniform, bought with hoarded pin money through a third party. She was done being a possession. She would have value, the kind a person built with their own hands. In her small satchel, next to a loaf of bread and a small knife, was a single, folded piece of paper. It was a newspaper clipping she had saved from the fire when her father had tried to burn every trace of her rescue. It was not about her. It was a small, dry article about railroad expansion conflicts in the West. But at the bottom, it mentioned a territory. A river, a valley, the valley James Mackenzie had called home. Her destination, not to thank him, not to indebt him with her gratitude. To work, to be unseen, to learn what it meant to survive not just a blizzard, but a life. She opened the door. The hallway was silent. At 3 a.m, the house slept. She moved without a sound, a gray ghost leaving a life of color. The train smelled of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and spoiled fruit. Clara kept her head down, her new cap pulled low over her ragged hair. She sat on a hard wooden bench in the third-class car, her satchel clutched on her lap. For 6 days, she moved west. The lush greens of the east melted into the flat, endless browns of the prairie. The sky opened up, a vast, empty bowl that made her feel small and clean. This was the season of change. The land was waking up. Ice was breaking on the rivers, turning the plains to a sea of thick, red mud. She heard men in the carriage ahead of her talking. They spoke of spring winds that could tear a roof from a house, and of wolves, starved by the long winter, moving in hungry packs. This land would be a test. She welcomed it. On the 7th night, the train jolted hard over a rough section of track. Clara was half asleep, her head nodding against the vibrating wooden wall. The jolt threw her forward. Her satchel slipped, and a small, white object fluttered from her pocket onto the filthy floor. A man sitting across the aisle, his face shadowed by a hard derby hat, bent to retrieve it. He did not hand it back immediately. He was a thick man, dressed in a plain, durable suit. His eyes, she saw, were a pale, sharp gray. They missed nothing. He held the small square of linen to the flickering gaslight. It was fine linen, impossibly fine for a girl in a patched wool dress. In the corner, embroidered in blue silk, were 2 letters, C.W. The man's gaze lifted from the handkerchief. It moved over her rough-spun dress, her calloused hands, her shorn hair. He was not rude. He was assessing. It was the cold, practiced look of a man who counts and measures everything. A man paid to notice things that were out of place. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She felt naked, her disguise stripped away by a piece of thread. He held the handkerchief out to her. His expression was blank. "Yours, miss," he said. Clara snatched it. She stuffed it deep into her pocket. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. The man merely nodded. His eyes already dismissed her. Turning back to the dark window, he settled his hat lower. But Clara knew he would not forget. A girl in rags with a rich girl's mark. She hid her shaking hands in her lap. The train wheels clicked out a rhythm against the rails. Going west, going west. She was free from her father, but she had just learned that possession had many forms, and that the truth, like a fine handkerchief, was a dangerous thing to carry. It could be dropped, and it could be seen. She walked the last 5 miles. The station had been nothing but a wooden platform and a water tower. The man at the telegraph office had pointed vaguely south. His words clipped. Mackenzie's place, down the valley, follow the creek. Can't miss it, only one. The valley was wider than she had imagined. A vast, green-brown bowl carved between jagged, snow-capped peaks. The air was so thin it stung her lungs, but it smelled clean, of pine and damp earth and something wild. The red mud of the plains had given way to rocky soil. By the time she saw the ranch, the sun was a painful glare in the west. It was not a ranch, it was a scar. A single log cabin, silvered by weather, sat hunched against the wind. A larger barn, its roof patched with tin, listed slightly to one side. A few crude corrals held nothing. This was not poverty. This was desperation. A man was in the yard, his back to her. He was splitting wood. The sound of the axe hitting the round was sharp, final. Thwack, crack. He was not the man from the blizzard. This man was taller, leaner, his movements economical and hard. He wore a faded flannel shirt, the sleeves rolled up, revealing ropey forearms. He stopped, axe in midair, and turned. He had not heard her. He had felt her. It was him. He was older than her memory. 2 years had been 10. Grief had carved new lines around his eyes and mouth. His beard was unkempt, his hair longer, but the eyes were the same. A clear, steady gray that had seen the blizzard in her and not flinched. Now, They flinched. They narrowed in suspicion. He saw a girl, ragged and filthy from the trail. Her hair hacked short, her face smudged with soot. "This is private land," he said. His voice was rougher than she remembered, deeper. Clara's heart hammered. Her prepared words vanished. She was Elena Carter. She had to remember. "I'm looking for work, Mr.—" Her voice came out as a croak. She cleared her throat. "Elena Carter. I can work. I'm a hard worker." He rested the axe head on the chopping block. He looked at her hands. She quickly hid them in her pockets, but it was too late. He had seen them. Soft, white, despite the grime. "Work." He almost laughed, but the sound died in his throat. "What kind of work you figure you can do? Girl, you look like you'd break in a stiff wind." "I can cook. I can clean. I can mend. I can learn the rest." "I ain't got money to pay," he said flatly, turning back to the wood. He set a new round. "Thwack. You best move on. Nearest town is 2 days' walk." "I don't need pay," she said, her voice rising in panic. "Just a place to stay. Food. I'll earn it. I swear I will." He stopped again. He looked at her for a long time. His gray eyes raked over her, seeing the desperation, the fear, and something else, a stubbornness. It was a look he knew. He saw it in the mirror every morning. "1 meal a day," he said, his voice final. "Whatever I'm having. You sleep in the barn. There's hay. It's dry." "Thank you," she whispered, relief making her dizzy. "Don't thank me yet," he grunted. "You'll be up before the sun. You shirk, you're gone. First job, haul water from the creek, both barrels, then fill the wood box, then muck the stall. There's 1 horse." He pointed to the barn. He did not ask her name again. He did not care. He had already dismissed her. He picked up his axe. Thwack. Clara went to the barn. It was huge and dark, smelling of old hay, dust, and manure. A single stall held a lean, gray horse that watched her with intelligent eyes. She found the water buckets. They were heavy, oak and iron. She made 6 trips to the creek, her shoulders screaming. Her soft hands rubbed raw on the splintered handles. She filled the wood box, stacking the split logs until her arms trembled. She mucked the stall, the unfamiliar prick of the pitchfork clumsy in her grip. She was not Elena Carter. She was a mule, and it was the first honest she had felt in her life. She saw him again at dusk. He came from the cabin holding a tin plate. It held a chunk of dark bread and some beans. He handed it to her without a word and went back inside. She ate it in the barn, wolfing it down, the beans cold but delicious. She found a pile of old grain sacks in a corner and made a bed. As she lay down, the ache in her body was a heavy, comforting blanket. She was too tired to think of Boston, too tired to think of anything but the pain in her hands. A rider appeared 3 days later. Clara was trying to mend a leather harness, her fingers clumsy and bleeding. The needle was thick, the leather tough. She was failing. The man rode in from the north, not from the valley road. He moved like a shadow, his horse a paint with no saddle. Just a blanket. He was Lakota. His black hair was in 2 long braids. He was lean, his face a map of hard plains, but his eyes were alive, quick and intelligent. He slid off the horse before it had fully stopped. James came out of the cabin, and for the first time, Clara saw him smile. It was a small, rusty thing, but it was real. "Chaska," he said. "James," the man replied. His voice was quiet, but it carried. He unslung 2 heavy sacks from his horse, salt, and some skins. "The ewes will be lambing soon." "You've got good timing." James took the sacks. His friend's eyes had already found Clara. They were not suspicious like James's. They were curious. They saw everything. "A new hand?" Chaska asked. "Trying," James said. "Elena Carter. This is Chaska. He's a friend." Clara nodded, her face hot with shame at her shoddy work on the harness. Chaska walked over. He did not look at her. He looked at the leather. "You're pulling the thread too tight," he said, his English perfect, with just a trace of a lilt. "You'll cut the leather. Let the awl do the work. And you need wax for the thread, like this." He took the tools from her. His hands were dark and scarred, but they moved with a dancer's grace. He punched, threaded, and pulled, and a perfect tight seam appeared. "Thank you," Clara said. Chaska nodded. He looked at her hands, which were now a mess of small cuts and blisters. He showed no pity. He just looked at her face. "You are a long way from home." It was not a question. That night, the two men sat by the fire in the cabin. Clara was in the barn, but the door was cracked, and she could hear their voices, low and serious. "They are moving fast," Chaska said. "The steel snake. They put markers down by the river, 2 miles east. They will cut the valley in half." "Damn them." James's voice was a low growl. "They can't. The treaty." "The treaty is paper. They have money. And they have lawyers. They are offering settlers scrip for their land, scrip that is worthless. When the settlers refuse, the lawyers find problems with their deeds. My deed is solid. My father filed it." "Your father is dead," Chaska said gently. "And the land barons do not care for the dead. They are forcing people out. They will come for you. James, this valley is the only easy pass through the mountains for 50 miles. There was a long silence. Clara heard the sound of a bottle and liquid pouring. "They will have a fight," James said. "They are counting on it," Chaska replied. "They have men with guns. Not soldiers. Worse, Pinkertons." Clara's blood went cold. She thought of the man on the train, the thick suit, the pale, assessing eyes. She had seen him again, in the small town she had passed through, talking to a man in the telegraph office. "What about you?" James asked. "Your people. They will be pushed up into the high rock, where nothing grows, or they will be pushed onto the reservation. It is the same thing." Chaska's voice was flat, devoid of emotion, which made it more terrible. "They are coming, James, and they will eat everything." The next day, the work was harder. James was a man possessed, his silence heavier, his orders sharper. He and Clara worked to repair a section of broken fence line up on the ridge. The wind was relentless, trying to tear the new posts from their hands. Clara, wearing a pair of James's old gloves, her hands taped in rags underneath, struggled to hold a post steady while he tamped the dirt. She slipped. The post wobbled. "Hold it steady," he snapped. "I can't do this and hold it both ways." "I'm trying," she snapped back, her own frustration boiling over. He grabbed the post from her and slammed it into the hole, tamping it with a vicious anger. He was not angry at her. He was angry at the wind, at the railroad, at the world. He straightened up, wiping the sweat and dust from his face with his sleeve. He looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time since she had arrived, he saw the soot on her cheek, the exhaustion in her eyes, and the raw, bleeding knuckles where the gloves had rubbed. And he saw something else. Her rough wool shirt, snagged on a branch, had pulled open at the neck. The collarbone was delicate, but beneath it, on her left shoulder, was a patch of skin, white and puckered, a scar. He froze. His mind flashed back. Pine smoke, ice, a girl's face, pale as milk, her dark honey hair spread on a dirty quilt, a riding habit, torn, a raw scrape on her shoulder. He looked from the scar to her face. This girl's face was thin, her hair a ragged mess, her hands ruined. It was impossible. A phantom. The blizzard had played tricks on him then. His grief was playing tricks on him now. That girl was a Whitmore, a steel princess. She was in Boston, in a silk dress, not in his valley, holding a fence post. He was a fool. "Fill the next hole," he said, his voice flat again, all the fire gone. He turned away, leaving her to wrestle the next heavy post. That evening, the cold in the barn was deeper. The spring wind had teeth. Clara shivered on her bed of sacks, She saw it then, hanging on a peg, half hidden behind some old harnesses. A woman's coat. It was heavy wool, dark green, lined with sheepskin. It was old, but well cared for. She hesitated. This was not his, this was hers, Sarah's, the wife who had died. She touched it. The wool was soft. She slipped her arms into it. It was too big in the shoulders, but it was warm, incredibly warm. She buried her face in the collar. It smelled faintly of lavender and smoke. A woman's smell. A home. Clara sat in the darkness, wrapped in a dead woman's coat, and felt a profound, aching guilt. She was an imposter. She was stealing this man's work, his food, his quiet grief. She was Elena Carter, a lie, hiding from her own life. She thought of her father, of his steel trap world. And she thought of James, his raw anger, his buried pain. She pulled the coat tighter. The guilt was a heavy thing, but the cold was heavier, and the weight of the coat felt like a promise, a burden she had to earn. In town, a few days later, James traded 2 cured deer hides for flour, coffee, and cartridges. The town was a single muddy street with a dozen false front buildings. Moses, the blacksmith and unofficial mayor, was shoeing a horse. He was an older man, his hair white, his arms as thick as tree limbs. "Heard the railroad surveyors are in the valley. James," Moses said, not looking up from his work. "Heard the same." James said, "They're posting offers at the saloon. Good money for any land in the pass." "It's not good money," James said. "It's paper. Some folks are taking it. Folks are scared." Moses finally straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked at James. "You've got a new hand. I hear a young girl." The town was small. News traveled faster than the wind. "Just a drifter," James said, uncomfortable, passing through. "Folks are saying she looks soft, not from around here." "Folks talk too much," James said. "They do," Moses agreed, his voice calm. "But they also look out for their own. You're one of our own. James, ever since your daddy, this railroad, it's a different kind of wolf. Be careful. They don't just want the land. They want the water. They want the souls." James rode home, the words of Moses echoing in his head. A different kind of wolf. He got to his cabin. He was alone. The girl, Elena, was out checking the snares Chaska had helped her set. He sat by his cold hearth. He picked up a piece of tack, a bridle that had been broken for a year. Sarah's bridle. He had not been able to fix it. He had not been here when she died. He had been in the mountains, hunting, blinded by his own anger at a bad winter. He had come back to a cold cabin. To a note from the doctor. Fever. It had taken her in 2 days. He had not been there. This guilt was a stone in his gut. It had been there for 3 years. It had walled him off. He had let the ranch go. He had let himself go. He was a ghost, same as she was. Now, this girl, this Elena, she was a disturbance. She was noise in his quiet, empty world. She was digging up things he had buried. Her clumsy work, her stubbornness, the way she had looked at him when he snapped. She had not cried. She had just gotten angry back. He did not want to feel this. He did not want to care if she stayed or went. He was afraid. He had opened his heart once, to Sarah. When she left, she had taken it all. There was nothing left to give, nothing left to lose. He put the bridle down. He would not fix it. He would not fix himself. He would just endure. Like the mountain, like the winter. He looked out the window. He could see her, a small figure in the distance, walking back from the creek. She was wearing Sarah's coat. His hands clenched into fists. A sudden, sharp anger surged in him. He wanted to go out there, to rip it off her, to tell her she had no right. But he stayed. The anger passed, leaving the familiar, cold emptiness. It was just a coat, and he was just a man waiting for the end. The few sheep Chaska had traded grazed in a high pasture, a small, nervous flock. James had decided to move them. The lower valley, with the railroad surveyors drawing their invisible lines, no longer felt safe. "They'll be safer on the North Ridge," he had said. His voice clipped. More scrub. Better cover. It meant a 2-day drive. Just him and Elena. They made camp at dusk, penning the sheep in a crude enclosure of fallen logs and rock. The air grew teeth as the sun dropped behind the peaks. A deep, profound cold set in. Clara, or Elena as she was known, pulled Sarah's heavy coat tighter. Her body was harder now. The blisters on her hands replaced by thick calluses. The ache in her muscles a dull, familiar friend. They sat by a small, smokeless fire, eating cold biscuits and jerky. James was silent, as he had been for most of the day. He stared into the flames, but he was seeing something else. The first sign of trouble was not a sound. It was the sheep. They stopped grazing, their heads lifting as one, their bodies bunching together in a silent panic. James was on his feet in an instant, the rifle in his hand. "Wolves," he whispered. Then she heard it, a low, hunting call that slid through the trees, answered by another, and another. They were being circled. Yellow eyes, pairs of them, gleamed in the dusk just beyond the firelight. "Get the other torch," James ordered, his voice calm and sharp. He grabbed a long branch from the fire, its end blazing. "Light it and yell, make noise, keep them back from the pen." Clara's hands fumbled with the pine knot and the matches. Her heart was a cold stone in her chest. This was not a Boston drawing room. This was real. The smell of pine and the sharp, musky scent of the predators filled the air. She lit the torch. The flame caught with a whoosh. "Yell," James commanded. Clara screamed. It was not a ladylike cry. It was a raw, ragged sound torn from her throat. She waved the torch at the moving shadows. The wolves were not afraid. They were starved. The long winter had made them bold. They darted in and out of the light, testing the perimeter. James fired a shot into the air. The sound cracked the sky, echoing off the mountains. The wolves flinched, retreated, but they did not leave. One, larger than the others, a gray shadow of ribs and hunger, saw a low spot in the makeshift fence. Clara was standing near it, her torch held high, her knuckles white. The wolf leaped. It was a blur of gray fur and white teeth. Clara had no time to scream. James moved. He was not fast. He was simply there. He threw his body against hers, shoving her backward, putting himself between her and the animal. The wolf, startled by the sudden appearance of the man, snapped, its teeth clicking shut on empty air. James brought the butt of his rifle down hard, catching the animal on the side of its head. The wolf yelped, falling back. In the desperate, clumsy shove, James's hand, slick with sweat inside his leather glove, splayed across her shoulder to push her clear. His fingers slid, and even through the thick wool of Sarah's coat and the rough linen of her own shirt, he felt it. The hard, puckered ridge of tissue, the scar. The world stopped. The wolves were howling. The sheep were a wall of bleeding terror. The fire spat sparks. But James was frozen. His hand was still on her shoulder. His gray eyes, wide with a sudden, shocking memory, locked with hers. The firelight danced on his face, illuminating the confusion, the dawning recognition. "I've seen," he began. His voice was a dry rasp, thick with disbelief. He did not finish. The wolf, recovering, lunged again, this time for his throat. James reacted. He did not aim. He shoved the rifle forward and pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening. The flash, bright as lightning. The wolf dropped, a heavy, inert weight, not 3 feet from them. The rest of the pack, shocked by the sudden death, scattered. The howls faded into the trees. There was only silence, broken by Clara's harsh, gasping breaths and the terrified bleating of the sheep. James stepped back from her. He was breathing hard, the smell of gunpowder thick around him. He did not look at her. He did not look at the scar he had touched. He turned, his movement stiff and jerky, and walked to the dead wolf. He prodded it with his boot. "Check the flock," he said. His voice was tight. All the life bled out of it. "See if they're all standing." The rest of the night passed in a strained, cold silence. They took turns on watch, but James did not speak another word to her. He sat across the fire, cleaning his rifle with meticulous, angry movements. Clara, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, could not stop thinking of the feel of his hand, the look in his eyes. He knew. He had to know. At dawn, they abandoned the plan. The ridge was not safe. They drove the battered sheep back to the ranch, a silent, funereal procession. Chaska was waiting for them in the yard. He was not resting against a post, as he usually did. He was standing straight, his face grim. In his hand, he held a raw, yellow wooden stake, the kind used by surveyors. "They are at the edge of the woods," Chaska said. His voice was flat. "By the creek. They are marking the line. They are on your land." James slid from his horse, his body a single, weary line of anger. "Who?" "Surveyors, 2 of them, and a 3rd man, a guard." Chaska looked hard at James. "He was in town yesterday, asking questions at the saloon." Clara, busy with untacking the horses, froze. Questions about what James asked? "About a girl," Chaska said, his dark eyes unblinking. "A rich girl. From the east. They say she is missing. Ran away from her family." Clara's stomach turned to ice water. She turned, her movements slow. "They say her father is a very powerful man. A baron. He has offered a reward. $5,000. He wants her back, sane or not." James looked at Clara. His face was a mask of dust and exhaustion. He was adding the soft hands that had hardened, the scar on the shoulder, the girl from the blizzard, pale and rich, with honey-colored hair, the girl in his yard, with ragged hair and a haunted look. As if summoned, 3 riders appeared at the far end of the valley. They were not settlers. They were not Lakota. They were riding up the creek bed, straight for the cabin. "Helena," James said, his voice low and dangerous. "Go in the barn. Stay there." "No," Clara said. Her own voice surprised her. It was shaking, but it was firm. "I will not hide." James gave her a look that could have cut stone, but he did not have time to argue. He took his rifle from its scabbard. Chaska stood beside him, his arms crossed, his presence a silent statement. The men rode into the yard. 2 were rough-looking, with pistols belted high. The 3rd man rode slightly ahead. He wore a clean derby hat and a thick, plain suit. It was the man from the train. "Mr. James Mackenzie," the man said. His voice was smooth, out of place in the thin mountain air. "This is my land," James said. "State your business and be gone." "Just doing our job, sir," the man said with a thin smile. "My name is Harlan. We're surveying the new rail line for the Transcontinental. Just need to confirm the old deed lines. We may be on your property for a day, maybe 2. "You will not," James said. "My deed is clear to the river. You are trespassing." Harlan's smile did not waver. "That's a matter of legal interpretation. Mr. Mackenzie, the maps our company holds show certain discrepancies." His pale, assessing eyes slid past James. They found Clara. He looked at her for a long, cold moment. He was comparing the memory from the train, the girl in rags. He looked at her shorn hair, her thin face, the way she stood her ground. Clara, in her terror and exhaustion, reached into the pocket of Sarah's coat for a rag. Her nerves were screaming. Her fingers closed around the small square of linen. She pulled it out, meaning to wipe the sweat from her palms. It slipped. The handkerchief, no longer white, but stained with her own sweat and the dirt of the trail, fluttered to the dusty yard. Harlan was off his horse in a fluid, predatory motion. He stooped and picked it up. He held it, just as he had on the train, pinching it between his thumb and forefinger. He looked at the embroidered initials. C. W. "This is yours, I believe," he said. His eyes locked on Clara's. "Give it to her," James said, his voice a low growl. He had stepped forward, his hand on his rifle. "Of course," Harlan said. He stepped toward Clara, his smile widening, but he did not hand it to her. He turned it over in his hand, as if admiring it. His smile became a smirk. "A pretty thing," he said. On the reverse side, invisible when folded, was a small, exquisitely embroidered hawk, its wings spread wide, its eye a single, sharp black stitch, a gift from her mother, years ago. Chaska, who had been as still as the mountain, took a sudden, sharp breath. His eyes, which had been passive, flashed with a new, sharp light. He was staring at the hawk. He looked from the handkerchief to Clara, and his face was full of a new, profound question. He knew that mark. Harlan finally held the handkerchief out to Clara. She snatched it. "You should be more careful with your property, miss," Harlan said, his voice soft, but each word a threat. "A young girl like you lose something valuable out here, it's likely gone for good." His gaze flicked to James, then back to Clara. He tipped his hat. "We will be back. Mr. Mackenzie, with the proper warrants, I suggest you reconsider the offer the company sent you. It is a very generous one." The three men turned their horses and rode away. They did not hurry. Silence descended on the yard. It was heavier, more terrible, than the howls of the wolves. James spoke first. He did not look at her. He looked at the dust settling where the horses had been. "Elena," he said, "the name was an accusation. You can ride last night with the sheep. That was not a clumsy girl. You ride like you were trained." Clara's stomach knotted. In the panic, she had moved with the instincts of a lifetime. She had forgotten to be Elena. And that, he nodded at the handkerchief she was clutching in a white-knuckled fist. "C.W." "It was my mother's," she whispered, her throat dry. "Who are you?" he demanded. Before she could answer, Chaska spoke. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension. "The hawk," he said, pointing to the handkerchief. "That is the mark of my grandmother's line. She was Lakota, taken east by a white trader before I was born. Where did your mother get such a thing?" Clara stared at him, her mind reeling. The man from the blizzard, the man from the train, the scar, the wolves, the hawk. It was all crashing down, a winter avalanche of truth. She turned to James. His face was a storm. He was seeing it all. The scar he had touched last night, the girl from the blizzard, the impossible story. "James!" she began, her voice cracking. "Who are you?" he roared, the word tearing out of him, a cry of betrayal and confusion. Clara looked at his face. She saw the man who had pulled her from the snow. She saw the man who had given her a place to stay. She saw the man who had just put his body between her and a wolf. If she told him the truth, he would hate her. He would see her as a liar, a rich girl, playing a game, mocking his poverty and his grief. He would see her as a Whitmore, part of the same steel and money machine that was sending men like Harlan to steal his land. If she lied again, she was betraying him. She was betraying Chaska. She was betraying the only person who had ever seen her as anything other than a possession. The truth was a flood, as Chaska had warned. It had been rising for weeks, and now it was here, ready to wash everything away. She looked at James Mackenzie, at his hard face and his haunted eyes. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "My name," she said, her voice small but clear in the cold mountain air, "is Clara Whitmore." The name hung in the cold, thin air. Clara Whitmore. It was a name that meant steel. It meant railroads. It meant power, the kind that had sent Harlan, the Pinkerton, to his valley, the kind that was choking the life from Chaska's people. James Mackenzie stared at her, the woman he had pulled from a blizzard, the girl who had shown up in rags, begging for work, the woman who had worn his dead wife's coat. He felt a fool, a blind, stupid fool. Whitmore, he said. The name tasted like rust. Daughter of Richard Whitmore. Clara flinched, but she held his gaze. Her own was terrified, but it was not dishonest. Not anymore. Yes. Chaska's face was impossible to read. His dark eyes moved from Clara to James, then to the mountains. He was listening to a conversation no one else could hear. He looked at the handkerchief in her hand. The hawk, he said again, his voice quiet. My grandmother's sister was taken by a traitor. She married a rich man in the East. She was told to forget her name. She never did. She stitched that hawk on everything she loved. Clara looked from Chaska to the handkerchief, her mind numb. My mother, her grandmother, was said to be an Indian princess, a story we were told to never repeat. Not a princess, Chaska said. Just a woman who remembered. He looked at Clara. So, you have that blood. And his... He nodded at the cabin. At the valley. You are the blizzard. And the shelter. All in one. James spat on the ground. She is a liar. The word was hard, brutal. She's playing a game. Is this a game? Clara held out her hands. They were not the hands he had seen in the blizzard. They were red, raw, the calluses split and bleeding from the day's work. I am not that person. I am not my father's name. What are you? Then he shot back. A girl in rags with a $5,000 reward on her head. Harlan knew. That Pinkerton. He knew. He suspected, she said, her voice shaking. He did not know. Now. He does. He saw the initials. And you brought him here, James said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. You brought him and his railroad right to my door. I came here, she said, her own voice rising, because you saved me. You, not my father, not his money. You saved my life, and you asked for nothing. You were the only honest thing that had happened to me. I wanted to be worth something, on my own. James laughed, a short, bitter sound. Worth something. He turned his back on her, pacing to the water trough. He plunged his hands into the icy water, scrubbing them, as if he could wash her lies off of him. Chaska stepped forward. This is a hard thing, James, but she did not lie last night. She did not lie when the wolf came. Get out of here, James said, his voice muffled. He was speaking to her. I want you gone. By morning, I will not have a Whitmore on my land. Clara's world, which she had so carefully, painfully rebuilt, shattered. James, please. By morning, he said, his back still to her. She turned and fled. Not to the road, not to the town. She ran to the barn, to the only home she had. She threw herself onto the pile of grain sacks and, for the first time since she had left Boston, she wept. The morning came, cold and gray. Clara had not slept. She had packed her small satchel. She had folded Sarah's coat, the coat she had no right to, and left it on the peg. She had nothing. She was nothing. She walked out into the yard. James was there, harnessing his gray horse. Chaska was gone. I am leaving, she said, her voice a dry croak. He did not look at her. He just pulled the leather strap tight. Town is 2 days' walk. I know. A wagon rattled into the yard. It was Josiah, the trader. He was a small, cheerful man who traveled a circuit, his wagon filled with everything from needles to whiskey. Morning. James, he called out. Cold one. Got those cartridges you asked for? And some coffee. Real arbuckles. Josiah clambered down, his eyes landing on Clara. He was a man who loved to talk, to read the newspapers he collected from station to station. He smiled. Then he paused. He squinted at Clara. His smile faltered. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. "You look familiar, girl. Awful familiar. Like a picture I saw in an Eastern paper. One of those society pages. A missing girl." The air in the yard froze. James stopped his work. He turned, slowly. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. James stepped between Clara and the traitor. His presence was a solid wall. "She is my hand. Josiah," he said. His voice was not loud, but it was flat, final. "She works for me. Now, what about that coffee?" Josiah, a man who survived by reading the wind, understood immediately. He saw James's protective stance. He saw the girl's terror. He saw the invisible line that had been drawn. Right, Josiah said, suddenly brisk. "The coffee. Let me get it." He bustled to his wagon, his back to them. The subject was closed. Clara stared at James's back. He had not done it for her. He had done it for himself. He would not be questioned on his own land. That was all. But he had not sent her away. He had called her his "she is my hand." He still would not look at her. He finished with the harness and turned. "Go get the eggs," he ordered, his voice still hard. "And mend that harness you were working on, the one Chaska showed you. Do it right this time." He was not sending her away. It was not forgiveness. It was a reprieve, a test. She nodded, a silent, painful lump in her throat. "Yes, sir." Life became harder and simpler. James did not speak to her, except to give orders. But the orders changed. He was not just giving her chores. He was teaching her. "This is a Honda," he said a few days later. They were in the barn, the air thick with the smell of leather and hay. He was holding a length of rope. "You cannot catch a steer if you cannot make the loop. You do not buy them. You make them." He showed her how to tie the complex, precise knot. She fumbled. "No," he said, his voice impatient. He stepped behind her. He was close. She could feel the heat from his body, smell the faint, clean scent of lye soap and sweat. He took her hands in his. His hands were rough, calloused, but his touch was surprisingly sure. He guided her fingers, folding the rope, tucking the end, pulling the knot tight. "It has to be right," he said, his voice low, his breath stirring her hair. "A knot has to hold. When everything else breaks, when the rope is screaming, the knot has to be the one thing that holds." She was trembling. She was not cold. He was holding her hands. He was teaching her. He finished the knot and stepped back, breaking the spell. The air rushed back in. "Practice," he said, his voice rough again. "Do it until you can do it in the dark." Chaska came back, as he always did, like a quiet change in the weather. He found her by the creek, practicing the throw with the lariat James had given her. She was failing, the loop collapsing before it reached the fence post she was using as a target. He watched her for a long time. "You throw with your arm," he said, making her jump. "You must throw with your whole body. The rope is part of you, like your shadow." He did not teach her knots. He taught her other things. He walked with her into the woods. He showed her how to read the sky, how the color of the clouds in the west told of the next day's weather. He showed her the track of a deer, how it was different from the track of an antelope. He showed her how to cross the icy river, using a long pole, finding the solid stones beneath the rushing water. She learned quickly. Her mind, trained in Boston to memorize poetry and genealogies, was sharp. It soaked up this new, real knowledge. "There is a legend," Chaska said one afternoon. They were sitting on a high ridge, looking down at the valley. "About the birds. A great fire sweeps the prairie. They fly away, but when the new grass grows, they come back. They always come back to the place they were saved, even if it is scarred." He looked at her. He knew. He was not angry, like James. He was watching, waiting. She earned her place, one drop of sweat at a time. One afternoon, she found a pile of weathered lumber stacked against the cabin. It was by the west wall, where a foundation of stones marked out a room that had never been built, an unfinished addition, a lean-to, the place James had abandoned when Sarah died. He was in town, gone for 2 days to trade for seed. She was alone. She found the hammer. She found a can of nails. She picked up a board. It was warped. She sighted it, placed it against the studs James had erected years ago. She set a nail. She drove it home. The sound was loud in the silence. Clang. She was mending his house. She was not thinking. She was just working. She was sealing the cracks against the wind. She was building. It was what she had come here to do. When James returned, he rode into the yard and stopped. He stared at the lean-to. She had walled in one entire side. The boards were not perfectly straight, but they were solid. He looked at her. She was standing there, in her patched dress, the hammer in her hand, sawdust on her face. He did not say thank you. He did not say anything. He just unsaddled his horse and turned it into the corral. But that night, at the fire, he cut the bread and handed her a piece. It was the first time he had offered her food since the day she had confessed. The rain started that night. It was not a gentle spring shower. It was a deluge, a solid wall of water that lasted for 2 days. The world dissolved. On the third morning, the roar woke them. It was not the rain. It was the creek. James was out of the cabin in an instant. Clara was right behind him. The creek, normally a quiet stream, was a raging, muddy, brown monster. It had jumped its banks, and it had torn through the small, earthen levee that protected the low pasture. "The cattle!" James yelled over the roar. His 4 cows, his only real wealth besides the land, were trapped on a shrinking island of high ground, bawling in terror. "The rope!" he shouted. "Running to the barn! Get the lariat!" They rode the horses into the churning, chest-deep water. The mud was a sucking trap, and the current tried to pull the horses' legs from under them. James was trying to get a rope on the lead steer, to pull it to safety. A section of the far bank, undermined by the water, collapsed. A wall of mud and trees surged into the water. The cattle panicked. They broke, scattering, running in terror straight for the deep ravine at the end of the pasture, a place where they would be lost or killed. "I cannot turn them," James yelled, his horse fighting him. Clara saw it. The lead steer, its eyes white with terror, was at the front. She knew, from years of fox hunts in Virginia, that if you turned the leader, the rest would follow. She kicked her horse, the gray, driving it hard through the water, ignoring James's shout. She cut a hard angle, getting ahead of the stampede. She uncoiled her rope. She did not throw with her arm. She threw with her whole body. The Honda knot, the one she had practiced in the dark, held. The loop sailed true, settling perfectly over the steer's horns. She did not pull. She did not stop. She turned her horse, hard, as she had been taught in a Boston riding academy, pulling the steer's head, forcing it away from the ravine, back toward the high ground of the ridge. The steer fought her, but she held. The other 3, seeing their leader turn, followed. She drove them, all 4, up out of the flood, onto the safety of the ridge. She sat on her horse, soaked to the skin, freezing, her arms shaking so badly she could barely hold the reins. The rope slipped from her numb fingers. James rode up to her. He was covered in mud. His face was a mask of shock and something else. He was not looking at her as Elena, the drifter. He was not looking at her as Clara Whitmore, the liar. He was looking at a woman who had just saved his livelihood. He did not speak. He just reached out, his rough, gloved hand brushing the soaked, ragged hair from her face. His thumb rested for just a second on her cheekbone. It was not a command. It was not a judgment. It was a touch. He pointed to the cabin. "Go!" he said, his voice raw. "Get by the fire!" A week later, they were in town. The mud had dried. The valley was scarred, but it was alive. Clara walked beside James. He had not told her to, but he had not told her to stay. Moses was at his forge. He was not working. He was standing with a group of other ranchers. His face was grim. "James," he said, his voice heavy. "Harlan and that railroad foreman were back. They brought the sheriff. They are serving papers." Papers for what James said. "Eviction," Moses said, his voice thick with anger. "They claim the original deeds are invalid. They are calling us squatters. They are threatening to seize our land." He held up a piece of paper. It was a petition. "We are fighting, but, James, they are threatening everyone." Clara looked at James. He was not looking at the petition. He was looking at the hills, where the yellow stakes of the surveyors marched, unstoppable, toward his home. He had fought the wolves. He had fought the flood. Now, the real enemy was here. The air in the town was thick with a new kind of poison. It was not just fear. It was the sour smell of legal deceit. A man in a city suit, smelling of bay rum and old paper, stood on the steps of the saloon. He was not Harlan. He was a lawyer, and he spoke in oily, reasonable tones about eminent domain and public good. "The Transcontinental Railroad brings progress. Gentlemen," he said, addressing the grim-faced ranchers gathered in the mud, "it brings trade. It brings civilization. Your deeds, unfortunately, were filed under territorial law, which is now, sadly, superseded by federal statute." What statute Moses demanded, his voice a low rumble of iron. "Our fathers and mothers bled for this land." "The statute that grants a federal right-of-way, sir," the lawyer said, smiling. "We only require a 200-foot clearance, if your cabins or barns happen to fall within that line. The company is prepared to offer a generous relocation stipend." "It is theft," James said, his voice quiet, but it cut through the murmuring. The lawyer's eyes snapped to him. "Ah, Mr. Mackenzie, we were hoping you would see reason. Your particular parcel is problematic, but our chief investor, a great philanthropist from Boston, insists that all landowners be treated with the utmost fairness." The lawyer consulted a paper, a Mr. Richard Whitmore. The name dropped into the street like a boulder, splashing the silence onto everyone. Clara stopped breathing. She felt every eye on her, though no one but James knew. James's face went white beneath the dust. He looked at Clara. It was not a look of surprise. It was a look of cold, final confirmation. The last piece of the lie had clicked into place. She was not just a runaway. She was a spy. She was the tip of the spear. "Whitmore," James said, testing the name. "Indeed," the lawyer beamed, missing the tone completely. "A titan of industry. His generosity is funding this entire project." "I'll bet it is," James said. He turned to Clara. "We're leaving." He did not wait for her. He stalked to his horse, his back a rigid wall of fury. Clara had to run to keep up. But they were stopped. A voice, smooth and confident, cut them off. "Mr. Mackenzie and Miss." Harlan, the Pinkerton, was standing by their horses. He was not smiling. His pale eyes were flat, like dirty ice. He had a piece of paper in his hand. "I was hoping to find you here," Harlan said to James. "Saves me the trip." He looked past James, his gaze pinning Clara to the spot. "I did some checking. After our last meeting, it pays to be thorough in my line of work." He unfolded the paper. It was a handbill. He held it up. "Wanted for information leading to the return of Miss Clara Whitmore." Clara's blood turned to slush. At the top was a sketched portrait. It was not her, not the gaunt, sunburnt creature she had become. It was the girl from Boston. Her hair coiled perfectly, her eyes wide and soft. It was the girl James had pulled from the blizzard. "She ran away from her home in Boston," Harlan announced, his voice carrying to the silent, watching crowd. "Her father, Mr. Richard Whitmore, is very worried. He is offering a reward." Harlan paused for effect. $5,000. The sum echoed in the muddy street. $5,000. It was more money than any man there would see in a lifetime. It was a king's ransom. The whispers started. Men in the crowd, men who had been drinking in the saloon, turned to look at Clara. Their eyes were no longer curious. They were assessing, calculating. $5,000, one man whispered to another. That's her! Look at her! The rich girl, playing poor. Moses and his men moved closer to James, their faces hard, but they were confused. They looked at James for a cue, but James was not looking at them. He was looking at Clara. His face was a terrible, blank mask. He had seen the betrayal. He had seen his valley, his land, his life being stolen by a man named Whitmore. And now he knew that the woman he had saved, the woman he had taught, the woman he had touched, was a Whitmore, too, and she was worth a fortune. Is this true? James Moses asked, his voice rough with concern. James did not answer. He grabbed the reins of his horse. Get on, he said to Clara. She fumbled, her hands shaking so badly she could not find the stirrup. He grabbed her by the arm, his fingers digging in like talons, and threw her into the saddle. He mounted his own horse in one fluid, violent motion. Mackenzie, Harlan called, a lazy warning in his voice. That's company property you're walking off with. James turned in the saddle. His hand was on the rifle in his scabbard. She is on my land, he said, his voice so low it was barely a breath. But it carried. You want her, you come and get her, but you bring your friends. Harlan, all of them. He kicked his horse, and they rode out of town, leaving a stunned, murmuring crowd behind them. The ride back to the cabin was silent. It was a cold, terrible silence that was louder than any scream. Clara tried to speak, but the words would not come. The horse's hooves on the rock was the only sound. $5,000. $5,000. When they reached the yard, he dismounted and dragged her from the horse. He was shaking with a rage so deep it was almost silent. It was all a lie, he said. His voice was not a shout. It was a statement of fact. No, she whispered, her throat raw. Not all of it. James. I did not know. I did not know about my father and this railroad. I swear I did not. You did not know, he repeated, his voice mocking. You just happened to run away, right to the valley your father is trying to steal. You just happened to have a map. You just happened to find me. I came to find you, she cried, the truth tearing out of her. Because you saved me, I did not know about any of this. You came to find me, he said, his face twisting. The poor, broken rancher. What was I a game for you, a diversion? Did you feel pity? Clara. He spat her name. Did you come here to ease your own guilt, you, with your soft hands and your $5,000 face? You pity me. No, I wanted to earn something. I wanted to be. I do not need your pity, he roared, the sound finally breaking free. A raw wound of pride. I do not need a Whitmore to tell me my life has value. I do not need anything from you, from your kind. You bring nothing but ruin. You bring lawyers. You bring Pinkertons. You bring the steel snake that will kill this land. He pointed a shaking finger at the road. I want you gone. I told you to go before. I was weak. This time, I am not. You get your things, and you get out of my sight. If you are here when the sun comes up, I will tie you to your horse and send you back to Harlan myself. He can have the money. I do not care. James, please, she wept, grabbing his arm. He ripped his arm away as if she had burned him. Do not touch me, he hissed. He turned and stormed into the cabin, slamming the door so hard the small window pane rattled. Clara stood alone in the yard, the world ending. She did not sleep. She sat in the barn, in the cold, dark place that had been her only home, and she knew she could not leave. Not like this. At dawn, James threw open his door. He had a cup of coffee in his hand. He was expecting the yard to be empty. She was there. She was not by the road. She was by the side of the cabin, at the unfinished lean-to. She had the hammer. She had the nails. She had the pile of warped lumber. He stopped, his cup halfway to his lips. She looked at him. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears. Her eyes were swollen, but her jaw was set. "Clang!" She set a nail and drove it home. "Did you hear me?" he yelled, his voice hoarse. "I said get out!" Clang! She placed another board. She did not look at him. He stalked across the yard. He was shaking again. He grabbed the hammer from her hand and threw it across the yard. "Are you deaf? Woman, I am done. We are done. Go!" She looked at the hammer, then looked back at him. Her voice was a dry whisper. "No." She knelt, found a new nail, and, using a flat rock, she began to hammer it in, her fist striking the nail head with clumsy, painful blows. He stared at her, his rage choked by a kind of stunned disbelief. She was defying him. She was broken, but she was not beaten. He turned, grabbed his rifle, and strode off into the hills. He did not come back all day. When he returned at dusk, exhausted and empty, she was still there. The wall was half finished. Her hands were bleeding. She was working by the last light of the sun. She had found a broken wheel from Josiah's old wagon, and she was trying to repair the spokes. He did not speak. He went inside and slammed the door. This went on for 3 days. He would leave. She would work. She finished the wall. She fixed the wheel. She replaced a 20-yard section of fence line that the flood had destroyed. She worked until she was weaving on her feet. She would collapse in the barn, sleep for a few hours, and be working again before he was even awake. She did not speak. He did not speak. The sound on the ranch was the sound of her hammer. Clang, clang, clang. It was the sound of a woman building her own penance. On the 4th day, Chaska rode in. He found James sitting on the porch steps, his head in his hands, a defeated man. He saw Clara, her face skeletal, her movements robotic, mending a section of the corral. Chaska sat down next to his friend. He said nothing. They watched the slow, steady rhythm of Clara's work. "She will not leave," James said, his voice dead. "I see that," Chaska said. "She is a Whitmore. Her father is the man, the one who is taking it all. She is also the woman who pulled your cattle from the flood," Chaska said. "She is the woman who wears the hawk." "It is all a lie. Chaska, a rich girl's game." Chaska was silent for a long time. The spring air was cool, but a light rain was beginning to fall. A soft, cleansing mist. It washed the dust from the air, turning the browns to a richer green. Finally, Chaska reached into the pouch at his side. He pulled out a small, leather-bound book, its cover warped and stained. "I have kept this," Chaska said. "Sarah gave it to me, the week before she died. She was afraid, not of dying, she was afraid for you." James looked at the book, his eyes wide. It was Sarah's journal. "She was my mother's cousin," Chaska said. "The blood of the hawk was in her. Too thin, but it was there. She knew you, James. She knew your pride. She knew your anger. She knew your guilt." Chaska placed the journal in James's unresisting hand. "She told me to give this to you, when the time was right, when you were ready to listen to someone other than the ghosts." James clutched the book. His knuckles were white. "Do not let your pride kill you, my friend," Chaska said gently. "It is a poor blanket for a cold night." Chaska stood. He walked over to Clara. He touched her arm. She flinched, startled. "Stop," he said. "Go to the barn. Sleep. The wood will wait." She looked at him, her eyes hollow. "And finally," she nodded. She dropped the tools and stumbled away. Chaska rode off, leaving James alone on the porch as the rain began to fall in earnest. He opened the journal. He read. He read of her love for him. He read of her joy in the high, wild country. He read of her fear of his black moods, the way he would disappear into himself, the way he was disappearing even before she got sick. And then he read the last page. The handwriting was weak, spidery. "My James, do not let this silence be your life. Do not let the guilt of not being here eat you alive. I forgive you. Forgive yourself. This house was meant for life, not for a tomb. This valley is too beautiful to be seen only by a ghost. Do not die with me. Open the door. Let in the one who is worthy. He sat there as the rain washed the world clean. He looked at the journal. He looked at the lean-to, its raw new wood shining in the wet. He heard the sound of the hammer, still echoing in his head. Clang, clang, clang. It was not the sound of a game. It was the sound of a debt being paid. He did not know what to do. He did not know what to feel. He just sat, clutching his wife's words, while the spring rain washed the mud from the ground. The riders came 2 days later. The rain had stopped, but the sky was a low, bruised gray. James was in the yard, splitting wood, the repetitive thwack of the axe the only sound. Clara was in the barn, her body aching, her hands raw, but her mind clear. She was not leaving. She was waiting. She heard the horses first, not Chaska's, not a lone rider. This was heavy, purposeful. 4 men, Sheriff Brody, his face a map of reluctant duty, 2 deputies, their eyes nervous, and Harlan. The Pinkerton was wearing his same hard derby hat, his face set in a smirk of finality. James, the sheriff said, reining in. He did not dismount. This has gone far enough. Brody, James acknowledged. He did not stop his work. He set a new round and split it with a single, clean blow. Crack. I have a warrant this time. James, the sheriff said, his voice unhappy. He unrolled a paper. Not an arrest warrant, a search warrant, based on Mr. Harlan's affidavit. Says you're harboring a runaway. Says she's not in her right mind. Says she's a danger to herself. She is not, James said, his voice flat. He laid the axe on the block. I have to see for myself, Brody said. I have to go in the barn. I have to search the cabin. It's the law. No, James said. The word was quiet, but it stopped everything. The deputies' hands twitched near their pistols. Harlan's smirk widened. This was what he wanted. Son, the sheriff said, his voice dropping. Do not make me. I'm telling you, as a man, do not start this. I will do my job. And I'll do mine, James said. He turned and walked to the barn door. He stood in the entryway, his body filling the space. He was unarmed. His rifle was inside, but he was a wall. This is my land. You are not coming in. Mackenzie, that's obstruction, Harlan said, his voice eager. Sheriff, arrest him. James, Brody pleaded. For God's sake, just step aside. James said nothing. He just stood, his eyes on Harlan. The air was so tight it was hard to breathe. A gun would come out, a shot would be fired, a man would die. He does not have to step aside. The voice came from the barn. It was not Clara's voice, not the one they knew. This voice was clear, strong, and it carried the cold authority of a Boston boardroom. Clara stepped out of the shadow. She was not the ragged, weeping girl from 4 days ago. She had washed. She had found a comb. Her short hair was neat. She wore her own patched dress, but she wore it like armor. She was still thin, still marked by sun and work, but she was no longer a drifter. She walked past James and stood in the middle of the yard, facing the sheriff. Sheriff Brody, she said, her voice ringing in the silence. My name is Clara Whitmore. I am 23 years of age. I am of sound mind and body. I am not a runaway. I am not a minor. I am not a criminal. Brody's jaw dropped. The deputies stared. Harlan's face darkened, his smirk gone. I am a free citizen, Clara continued, her gaze unwavering. I am here on this ranch by my own choice. I work for Mr. Mackenzie for my room and board. I have broken no law. She turned her head slightly, her eyes finding Harlan. And I am not the property of my father, nor of his railroad. She's lying, Sheriff Harlan snapped. She's confused. Her father's reward. Her father's reward is a civil matter, Clara said, cutting him off. It is not a legal one. You have no warrant for my arrest. You have no court order declaring me incompetent. You have no document of indenture. You have, in fact, no right to address me at all." She turned back to the sheriff. Sheriff Brody, do you have any legal paper that compels me, a free woman, to go anywhere against my will?" Sheriff Brody looked at the search warrant in his hand. He looked at this woman, who spoke the law better than his own deputies. He looked at her hard, clear eyes. He saw no confusion. He saw no madness. He saw a woman who had made a choice. "Ma'am," he said, and the word was full of respect. He slowly rolled the warrant back up. "No, I do not." "Then you are trespassing," Clara said. "Now you see here," Harlan exploded. He spurred his horse forward, his hand dropping to his pistol. "You are coming with us, girl, or—" He stopped. No one had moved, but the world had changed. On the ridge to the north, a line of riders had appeared. They were not close, they were not threatening. They were just watching. Chaska, and beside him, 4 other Lakota men, their figures stark against the gray sky. They were not armed for war. They were armed as witnesses. And from the valley road, another group had arrived. Moses, his blacksmith's apron still on. Josiah, the trader, 3 other ranchers whose land was also threatened. They fanned out, forming a silent half-circle at the edge of the yard. They were not a mob. They were a community. They held no guns. They were just watching, bearing witness. Harlan looked at the silent Lakota on the hill. He looked at the silent ranchers in the road. He looked at the sheriff, who was now pointedly ignoring him. He looked at James, who had not moved. And he looked at Clara, who had not flinched. He was a man who calculated odds. The odds had just changed. "This is not over," Harlan spat, his voice a low, vicious promise. "The railroad has a long memory. Brody, you just lost your town." He turned his venom on James. "And you, Mackenzie, you think this is a victory? You are a dead man. You are just too stupid to lie down." He wheeled his horse around, so hard it reared. He and the deputies, who looked relieved to be leaving, galloped away, their retreat a cloud of angry dust. Sheriff Brody was the last to leave. He sat on his horse, looking at Clara. He looked at James, who was still standing in the barn door. "Ma'am," he said to Clara. He touched the brim of his hat. "Mr. Mackenzie." He turned and rode away, a man who had made his choice. Silence fell on the yard. It was a clean, sharp silence. The wind blew. A bird called. Moses and the other ranchers slowly, quietly, turned and rode away. They had done their part. On the ridge, Chaska and his men melted back into the trees. It was over, for now. Clara let out a breath she did not know she was holding. Her legs, which had been pillars of iron, suddenly turned to water. She swayed. She did not fall. James was there. He had crossed the yard in 2 strides. His hand was on her arm, holding her steady. It was not a violent grip. Like before, it was firm, solid. He did not let go. He stood beside her, his shoulder touching hers. They stood together, in the center of the yard, in the center of the world, and faced the empty road where their enemies had been. He said nothing. He just stood with her, a silent declaration. You are not alone. After a long moment, his gaze lifted. He was not looking at the road. He was looking at the cabin. He was looking at the lean-to, the new, raw wood she had hammered into place, sealing the crack in his home, the wall she had built. He looked at it, and she saw a muscle in his jaw work. He was not seeing a repair. He was seeing a resurrection. He was seeing the boards she had nailed up, and he was seeing the ones he had failed to. He was seeing a house that had been a tomb, and was now, suddenly, a home. He looked down at her. His gray eyes were clear, the ghosts chased out by the morning's fire. He saw her, Clara, the woman who had built a wall, The woman who had faced down the law. The woman who had not run. He nodded. A single, slow movement. It was a truce. It was a thanks. It was a beginning. He did not let go of her arm. Not for a long time. James just stood there in the quiet yard, the dust settling, the world silent again. He held her, not in anger, not in passion, but as a man anchors a boat in a storm. She was trembling. He was solid. Finally, he released his grip. His hand slid from her arm, his fingers brushing hers, a touch as rough as bark. He did not look at her. He looked at the cabin. He nodded, once, toward the door. "You are cold," he said. His voice was raw, scraped clean. "Get inside." It was not an order. It was an invitation. The first... She walked past him. He did not follow. Not immediately. He stood in the yard, his eyes on the ridge where Chaska had been. He was listening. She went inside. The main room was dark, smelling of old smoke and the leather he worked on. She stopped, unsure. She was still in her mind. The hand, the drifter. She had no place here. He came in behind her, shutting the door. The sound was loud, a final, hollow thud. It shut the world out. He walked past her. He did not light the main lamp. Instead, he went to the new lean-to, the room she had built. He struck a match. The small, pot-bellied stove she had salvaged from the town dump and cleaned was in the corner. He had run a pipe for it. A small, neat pile of kindling was beside it. He had prepared this. He built a fire, the small room, with its raw, new wood smell, filled with a flickering, orange light. It was the only light in the house. He pointed to a low stool, the only furniture in the room. "Sit." She sat. He remained standing, his back to the stove, his tall shadow dancing on the walls. The silence stretched. It was not the angry silence of the past week. It was a heavy, waiting silence. The silence after a battle, when the living count the dead. She spoke first. Her voice was a whisper, lost in the crackle of the new fire. "I have to tell you," she said. He did not move, but his shadow stilled. He was listening. "It was not a game," she said, her eyes on her own ruined hands, clasped in her lap. "It was not pity. When you, in the blizzard, you saved me. And my father, he paid the doctor. He tried to pay you. He erased it. He erased you. He wanted it to be as if it never happened, as if his daughter had not been weak, as if a man like you had not been strong." She looked up at him. His face was in shadow, his eyes unreadable. "I came back because you were the first person in my entire life who looked at me and just saw a person. Not a Whitmore, not a prize, not a piece of property." Her voice broke. "Just for a second. You saw a human being who was cold, and you gave her your fire. I wanted to be that person again, the one you saved, not the one my father owned. I just wanted to be real." The confession hung in the warm, pine-scented air. A wealthy girl, leaving her home, disguised as an orphan, seeking the poor rancher who had saved her life. It was not a game. It was a pilgrimage. James was quiet for a long time. The fire snapped. He finally moved, walking to the small, single window. He looked out at the dark, at the land he was about to lose. "When Sarah died," he said, his voice so low she had to strain to hear him. "I was not here." He was not speaking to her. He was speaking to the glass, to the ghost. "I was in the mountains. We had argued about money, about, I do not know, about me. I was angry. I was always angry. I rode off to hunt. I was gone 3 days. When I came back, the doctor had already been here. She was gone." He rested his forehead against the cold glass. His whole body was a line of grief. "I have been here," he said. "But I have not been here. I have been a ghost. This house, this land. It was just the place I was waiting to die. I was angry at you, not because you lied. I was angry because you were alive, because you were fighting. You came in here, and you hammered on the walls. You started making noise. You woke me up, and I hated you for it." He turned from the window. His face was a mask of old pain. "I am sorry for her. I am sorry she is gone, but I am more sorry that I was not alive when she was here. That is the guilt. Clara, that is the thing I cannot fix." She stood up. She did not argue. She did not offer cheap comfort. She walked to him, until she was standing in front of him. She put her hands in his, not to hold them, just to place them there, to stop their shaking. "She knew," Clara whispered. "I read it. I found her journal. The day you were gone. I am sorry. I should not have." His eyes widened. A new pain. "What?" "The last page," she said, her grip tightening. "She wrote that she forgave you. She wrote, 'This house was meant for life, not for a tomb. Open the door. Let in the one who is worthy.'" He stared at her. His breath caught in his chest. He looked at her face, illuminated by the fire. He saw the scar he had touched. He saw the woman who had faced down Harlan. He saw the person who had read his wife's last words and had not judged him. He raised a hand, his calloused, rough fingers trembling. He touched her face, his thumb brushing the line of her jaw, just as he had in the flood. But this was not a fleeting touch. This was an exploration. He was learning her face by heart. "Clara," he breathed, her name, her real name. He did not pull her. He did not demand. He simply leaned in, his head lowering to hers. It was a slow, agonizingly gentle movement. The kiss was not what she expected. It was not fire. It was warmth. It tasted of wood smoke and salt and a desperate, lonely quiet. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of recognition. Two solitudes, touching in the dark. She put her hands on his chest, feeling the hard, steady beat of his heart under her palms. It was the most real thing she had ever felt. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, burying his face in her ragged hair. It was not an embrace of a man taking a woman. It was an embrace of a man holding onto a piece of solid ground in a world that was washing away. They stood there for a long time, the fire in the small stove burning low, their two heartbeats the only rhythm in the room. The house was no longer a tomb. It was a shelter. Miles away, on the ridge. Chaska sat motionless on his horse. He was not looking at the cabin. He was listening to the north. He was a man made of the night wind, and he heard everything. He heard the owl. He heard the creek. And he heard the faint, distant, rhythmic sound. Thud. A pause. Thud. A pause. Thud. The sound of steel sledges driving steel spikes. The railroad crews were working through the night. They were not waiting for the law. They were not waiting for warrants. They were coming. The steel snake was moving. The morning was bright. The sky washed clean. Clara woke first, disoriented. She was not in the barn. She was on a pallet of blankets in the new lean-to, in front of the cold stove. She was alone. She got up, her body stiff. She walked outside. James was in the yard. He was not splitting wood. He was at a rough-hewn bench, planing a piece of pine. The shush-shush of the plane was a clean, peaceful sound. He looked up as she approached. He did not smile. He was not a man for easy smiling, but his eyes were clear. The ghosts were gone. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she replied. He picked up the piece of wood he had been working on. It was smooth, glowing in the morning light. He had carved two words into it, deep and clean. Mackenzie House. He handed it to her. Then he handed her a hammer and two clean nails. She took them. She walked to the cabin door, to the frame he had built, and she hammered the sign into the wood. Clang, clang. It was a different sound from her work on the lean-to. It was not penance. It was a declaration. She stepped back. They looked at it. Mackenzie House. She read. A house needs a name, he said. He looked at her. And a house needs life. What you said. About your father. About your teaching. I would like to teach, she said, the idea new, but feeling right. If anyone would come, Moses's children, the other ranchers, maybe, she looked toward the hills, maybe Chaska's people. Maybe, James said. They need a bridge. He looked at his own hands, the hands that had held her, the hands that had built and fought. I am good with wood, he said, as if it were a new discovery. The lean-to, it was good to build again. I can make things, not just endure. He touched the workbench, a chair, a table, a good door. It is all about the joinery. He picked up 2 small scraps of wood. A mortise, he said, pointing to a small, square hole. And a tenon. He pointed to the tongue. They are cut to fit. They lock together. They do not need nails. They do not need glue. They just need to be true. They hold. It is a promise, from one piece of wood to the other. He looked at her, and she understood. Love was not a storm, or a fire. It was joinery. It was 2 things, cut true, fitting together to make something stronger. A new peace settled over the valley, but in the quiet morning air. Clara could almost hear it. A faint, metallic echo from the north. A promise of a different kind, a threat. The work was just beginning. The quiet lasted for 5 days. It was a false quiet, a held breath. James worked at his new bench, the clean shush of his plane sounding like a prayer. Clara started her school, not in a building, but under a large cottonwood tree by the creek. 3 children came, 2 from a neighboring ranch, and 1 Lakota boy. Chaska's nephew, who watched her with bright, curious eyes. They were learning to spell water when the shadow fell. It was not a man on a horse. It was a carriage, a black carriage, lacquered and shining, pulled by 4 matched black horses. It was a thing of impossible, obscene luxury. It looked like a hearse, and it had followed the fresh, muddy tracks of the railroad crews. The carriage stopped in the yard, its polished wheels sinking into the mud. The door was opened by a man in a black suit. Another man stepped out. He was not tall. He was built like a steel vault, thick and solid. He wore a fine wool suit, a silk cravat, and a hat that had not seen a single speck of dust. His beard was gray, perfectly trimmed. His eyes were the color of new money, cold and bright. It was Richard Whitmore. He did not look at the cabin. He did not look at James, who had frozen at his workbench. He did not look at the children. He looked at his daughter. Clara had stood up, the primer book falling from her hands. She was in her patched dress, her face browned by the sun, her hands stained with ink. "Clara," he said. His voice was not a shout. It was a command, the voice he used to level mountains and redirect rivers. "This foolishness is over. Get in the carriage." Behind him, 2 other men dismounted from their horses. One was the lawyer from town. The other was not Harlan. This man was different. He was gaunt, with a long coat and 2 pistols tied low on his hips. He was a gunman, pure and simple. James moved. He did not run. He walked from his workbench and stood beside Clara. He was holding the plane. It was a poor weapon, but it was all he had. Richard Whitmore's gaze slid to James. He appraised him. He saw a farmer in worn clothes, holding a piece of wood. He dismissed him. "You have 5 minutes, Clara," Whitmore said. "You will come home. You will put this nonsense behind you. You will marry the man I have chosen. If you do not, if you choose to stay in this filth, then you are no longer my daughter. You will be cut off. You will have nothing. You are dead to me." The children had run, scattering like quail, disappearing into the trees, but others were coming. Moses, alerted by one of the children, was walking up the road from town, and on the ridge, Chaska appeared. He was not alone. The community was gathering again. This time, the stakes were higher. Clara stepped in front of James. She was facing her father. The mud of the yard she had worked, was between them. "You are right, Father," she said, her voice clear and carrying. It was the same voice that had faced down the sheriff. "This foolishness is over." A flicker of satisfaction crossed Whitmore's face. "Good. Get in the carriage." "I am not getting in the carriage." Clara said, "I am not your daughter. Not in the way you mean. I am not a stock certificate. I am not a length of track. I am a person, and you." She looked at him, her gaze finally, truly, seeing him. "You do not love me. You love your name. You love your reputation. You do not love the person named Clara." Whitmore's face turned a dark, mottled red. "You ungrateful!" "Stop!" a voice called. It was Moses, striding into the yard. "This is not Boston. Mr. Whitmore! This is not your personal property." The lawyer stepped forward. "I must advise you, sir," he said to Moses, "that Mr. Whitmore is here as the primary stakeholder of the Transcontinental, and he is here as a concerned father, retrieving his unwell daughter." "She is not unwell," James said, his voice a low growl. "She is a free woman." "And you," the lawyer sneered, "are a squatter. We have the legal papers. Your deed is worthless." "No," a new voice said. Chaska walked into the yard. He was not a ghost on a ridge. He was a solid, present man. He held a rolled piece of hide. "You are the ones who are trespassing," Chaska said. He did not look at Whitmore. He looked at the lawyer. "You say you have maps. We have maps, too." He unrolled the hide. It was an old, beautiful map, drawn in pigment and charcoal. It showed the valley. It showed the rivers. And it showed a line, drawn by Chaska's grandfather. A line agreed to by the original territorial governor. The line of the treaty. "Your right-of-way is 200 feet," Chaska said. "Your surveyors, Mr. Whitmore, have marked a line that is half a mile wide. They have crossed the treaty line. They are on Lakota land. They are on Mr. Mackenzie's land. They are stealing." "This is ridiculous," the lawyer sputtered. That thing is not a legal document." "It is a sacred one," Chaska said, "and it is backed by this." He produced a paper, given to him by Moses, the Territorial Land Act of 1867, which states that any deed filed before the act and honored by the native tribes is inviolate. James's father filed his deed. My grandfather honored it. This is preposterous," Whitmore roared. He was losing control. "And," Moses added, stepping forward, "we have testimony from Josiah, from my son. Your men, Mr. Harlan, have been threatening ranchers, offering them worthless script. They have been trying to cheat us." Richard Whitmore looked at the lawyer. The lawyer was sweating. For the first time, Richard Whitmore's money was not working. He looked at the gunman. The gunman just watched, his hand resting on his pistol. This was not his fight. Yet, Whitmore looked at his daughter. She had not come to his side. She was standing next to the rancher. She had made her choice. His face went dark. "If I cannot have this valley?" he hissed. "No one can." He turned his head, just slightly, and nodded. A signal. He nodded at the gunman. The gunman smiled. A thin, ugly thing. He did not draw. He turned, walked to his horse, and mounted. What is he doing?" Moses asked. The gunman did not answer. He kicked his horse and galloped away. Not toward town, but north, toward the next ranch, the one belonging to the family whose children were in Clara's class. He is going to Johnson's place," a rancher whispered. And then they saw it. A wisp of smoke from the direction of the Johnson place, a wisp that became a plume, black, oily. "The grain store!" Moses yelled. "He has fired the grain store. He is trying to burn them out." It was a diversion. It was a punishment. It was a message. "Clara, the women! Get the buckets!" James roared, his paralysis broken. "To the creek. Try to keep the sparks from the cabin." To James, this was not a choice. He turned to Chaska. "The livestock, Johnson's cattle will stampede. They will run for the canyon." "I am with you," Chaska said. James ran for his horse. Chaska was already on his paint. They galloped out of the yard, past the stunned Richard Whitmore, past the terrified ranchers. They rode into the smoke. Clara did not panic. She looked at the women and the two old men left in the yard. "Moses, you! With me, we need a bucket line. From the creek to the house, not Johnson's place. We cannot reach it. We protect this house. We protect the town." The women, who had been frozen in fear, looked at her. They saw the authority. They saw the will. They ran for the buckets. Clara was organizing a line, her voice sharp, clear, and steady. Richard Whitmore stood by his carriage, forgotten. He was watching his daughter, not with anger, but with a kind of stunned, horrified awe. She was not a lady. She was a general. James and Chaska rode through a world of smoke. The grain store was a towering inferno. The Johnson family was already out, fighting it, but the cattle, as James had predicted, were running. A herd of 50, blind with terror, was thundering straight for the high canyon, a narrow, rocky slit in the earth with a rickety wooden bridge over it. "The bridge!" James yelled. "If they go over, they are lost." "We have to turn them," Chaska shouted. They rode. It was a desperate race, the sound of the fire and the thunder of the hooves filling the world. They were closing in. And then the gunman appeared. He was on the far side of the canyon, on the bridge. He was not trying to save the cattle. He was waiting for James. He raised his rifle. A shot kicked up dirt by James's horse. "Go!" James yelled to Chaska. "Turn the herd, I will handle him." "No, James." But James had already peeled away. He was riding for the bridge. It was a one-man fight. Chaska turned, his face a mask of fury. He rode into the herd, screaming a Lakota war cry, firing his own pistol into the air, trying to turn the terrified animals. James rode onto the bridge. The wood was old, rattling. The gunman was at the other end, 100 yards away. He was smiling. He took careful aim. James did not have a rifle. He had the lariat, still coiled at his saddle. He rode straight at the man, his head low. The man fired. The bullet sang past James's ear. James did not slow. He was building his loop. His hands were not shaking. He was thinking of the Honda knot. A knot has to hold. The gunman fired again. He hit the horse, the gray, the good, brave horse, screamed and went down, pitching James forward. James hit the bridge hard, the wood tearing his shirt. He was on foot. The gunman was 20 yards away, his pistol out, walking toward him, savoring it. "This is for Mr. Whitmore, farmer," the gunman sneered. James was on one knee. He still had the rope. "No," James said, his voice raw. "This is for me." He threw, not with his arm, with his whole body. The loop, heavy and true, sailed. It settled over the gunman's head and shoulders. The man laughed. "A rope." James yanked, hard. He did not pull the man to him. He pulled him sideways, off his feet, his legs tangling in the lariat. The man went down, his pistol clattering, skidding across the wood, spinning, and falling through a gap in the planks, disappearing into the canyon below. The gunman, disarmed, roared and scrambled to his feet. James was on him. It was not a fight. It was a brawl. It was fists and boots and knees. James, his arm on fire from the fall, his world a red haze, was a machine. He was fighting for Clara. He was fighting for his house. He was fighting for his life. He hit the man in the throat. He hit him in the gut. He hit him until the man stopped moving. He left him, gasping and broken, on the bridge. He turned. Chaska had done it. The herd was turned, milling in a confused circle. Safe. And in the valley, the fire was dying. Clara, her face black with soot, her arms screaming, had led the line. They had saved the cabin. They had saved the town. Richard Whitmore was still by his carriage. He was watching his world end. His gunman was defeated. His legal case was in ruins. His daughter was a stranger, a creature of fire and mud, giving water to Moses. Chaska rode up to Whitmore's carriage. He did not touch it. He just sat on his horse, his presence a silent threat. He and the other Lakota men formed a quiet, unmoving line, blocking the road back to the railroad camp. The lawyer approached Whitmore, his face pale. "Sir," he whispered, This is a disaster. The local laws, the treaty, it's all valid. And she—" He looked at Clara. "She is a competent adult. We have no legal standing. We cannot force her. We should go." Richard Whitmore looked at the valley. He looked at the smoke. He looked at the rancher, James Mackenzie, walking back across the bridge, his horse dead, his knuckles bloody, but his eyes were alive. He looked at his daughter. She did not look at him. She was tending to her life. He had lost in law. He had lost in force. And he had lost his daughter. "Get in the carriage. Mr. Williams," Whitmore said to his lawyer, his voice dead. He climbed into the black carriage. He did not look back. The carriage turned. A difficult, muddy maneuver. Chaska and his men parted, like water around a stone, and let them pass. The carriage rolled away, leaving the valley in a smoking, exhausted, and finally, peaceful silence. The black carriage, a hearse for a life now dead, was halfway across the yard when it stopped. The window slid down. Richard Whitmore's face, gray and rigid, appeared in the opening. He did not look at James, who was walking slowly back from the bridge, his knuckles raw and bloody. He did not look at Moses, or the soot-covered ranchers. He looked only at his daughter, who stood by the bucket line, her face a mask of smoke and sweat. "You are dead to me," Richard Whitmore said. The words were not loud. They were cold, precise, a final accounting. "You have no name. You have no family. You have nothing." Clara walked toward the carriage. She stopped 10 feet away. So he would have to look at her, not as a possession, but as a person. "No, Father," she said, and her voice was not angry. It was just true. "You are wrong. I have a name, and for the first time, I am alive, right here." She turned her back on the carriage. She did not wait to see his reaction. She walked over to James, who had just reached the edge of the yard. She did not fuss over him. She just stood with him. The carriage door slammed. The driver snapped his whip. The carriage lumbered away, disappearing down the valley road. It was over. The final chain had been cut. James looked down at his bloody hands. He looked at Clara, at her blackened face and clear, steady eyes. He did not touch her. He just nodded, a deep, bone-weary acknowledgement. The sound of a new rider made them all turn. It was Sheriff Brody, his horse lathered. He had seen the smoke from town. "What in God's name happened here?" he demanded, his eyes taking in the smoldering ruins of the Johnson place, the exhausted ranchers, the armed Lakota men who were now quietly dismounting. "Mr. Whitmore's man," Moses said, pointing to the bridge. "He set the fire." "He is still on the bridge," Chaska said. "He is not going anywhere." Brody rode to the bridge. He was back in 10 minutes. His face was grim. He was not alone. He had James's lariat, and he was dragging the gunman, who was now bound behind his horse. "Arson," Brody said, his voice hard. Assault with a deadly weapon? I think the judge in the Capitol will be very interested in that. He looked at James. You pressed him hard. Mackenzie. He fell, James said, his voice flat. Brody nodded, accepting the lie. He did, and Harlan, the Pinkerton, I arrested him an hour ago. Josiah, Moses, and 2 other ranchers came to my office, signed affidavits. They saw Harlan paying this gunman in the saloon yesterday. Conspiracy. That will stick. The railroad lawyers are not going to get them out of this. Not this time. The company has overreached. The law, which had been a weapon against them, was now their shield. The rebuilding started the next day. It did not feel like a chore. It felt like a victory. It was not just the Johnson family. Replacing their grain store, it was the whole valley. James and 2 other men were on the frame, their hammers ringing in a steady, new rhythm. The women, Clara among them, served hot coffee and bread. Even the children helped, clearing debris. Chaska arrived with his Lakota kinsmen. They did not come to watch. They brought timber from the high country, logs that were straight and strong, already stripped. They worked alongside the white ranchers. There was no grand speech. There was just the shared work. A man would hand a tool to another, and it did not matter what blood he had. Moses, his great arms moving with practiced ease, was setting new hinges for the door. He paused, wiping the sweat from his face, and walked over to Chaska, who was showing James's new apprentice, the Johnson boy, how to read the grain of a support beam. Chaska, Moses said. Chaska turned, his dark eyes quiet. The town council met last night. Moses said, his voice formal. We have been running this town a certain way, maybe not the best way. We have been blind. We would be honored if you would join us, not just as a friend, as a member. We need a bridge, and not just over the canyon. We need a man who knows the land, who speaks the truth. Chaska looked at the men working. He saw Lakota and White, their shoulders to the same beam. A bridge needs 2 sides. He said, if you are ready to hold your side, I will hold mine. He held out his hand. Moses, his own hand black with forged soot, gripped it. It was a new treaty, made not of paper, but of flesh and work. That night, the work was done. The grain store was rebuilt, stronger than before. They gathered on the porch of the Mackenzie house, the new porch of the lean-to. Someone, Josiah, had brought a fiddle. A slow, sweet tune drifted into the cooling air. Clara sat on the steps, her hands clean, but the calluses were permanent. She watched James. He was not the haunted, angry ghost. He was talking with Moses, a rare, small smile on his face. She reached into her pocket. The handkerchief, C.W., the mark of the girl who had run, the girl who was gone. She went inside, into the new room, by the light of a single lamp. She took out her small sewing kit. She threaded a needle with dark blue thread. She looked at the handkerchief, at her mother's hawk, the mark of Chaska's bloodline. She turned it over. In the bottom corner, on the inside, she sewed a new letter, a single, blocky capital, M. She stitched it slowly, carefully. Each stitch was a promise. She was Clara Whitmore. She was a Mackenzie. She was the hawk. She was all of it. She was whole. The fiddle music stopped. She looked up. James was standing in the doorway of the lean-to. He had been watching her. He said nothing, but his eyes understood. He turned and walked onto the main porch. The crowd quieted. In his hand, James held a small, leather-bound book, Sarah's journal. His hand was shaking, just slightly. He opened it to the last page. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried in the sudden, respectful silence. I have been living with a ghost, he said, my own, and I have been honoring another. He looked at the faces, his friends, his neighbors. Sarah, my wife. She left a last word. I was not man enough to hear it. Until now. He took a deep breath. He read, "My James, do not let this silence be your life. Do not let the guilt of not being here eat you alive. I forgive you. Forgive yourself." His voice cracked. He stopped. Clara stood up, ready to go to him, but he held up a hand. He would finish. "This house was meant for life, not for a tomb. This valley is too beautiful to be seen only by a ghost. Do not die with me. Open the door. Let in the one who is worthy." He closed the book. He looked up, and his eyes found Clara's. He was not looking at a ghost. He was not looking at a replacement. He was looking at the woman who had opened the door. "This house," he said, his voice clear and strong, "is open. It is a house for life." He stepped off the porch. The fiddler, sensing the moment, struck up a new tune, a fast, lively reel. The sound of the hammer had been replaced by the sound of laughter. Later, the lean-to was quiet. The guests were gone. The children were asleep. By day, it was now the valley school. By night, it was his workshop. James lit a lamp, the clean smell of pine shavings filling the air. He picked up his plane. He had an order, a new cradle, for the Johnson family. He began to work. The shush-shush of the plane was the sound of a man building a future. The sun was not yet visible, but the eastern sky was a pale, cold blue, a sheet of ice just beginning to crack. They stood on the porch of the Mackenzie house, the raw, new sign above the door. The air was sharp, smelling of pine and the promise of a new day. Clara did not wear a white dress. She wore the patched gray wool, mended and clean, the one she had earned. James wore his best flannel shirt, his beard trimmed, his hair still damp. His hands, she saw, were scrubbed clean, but the calluses were permanent. Moses stood before them, his great, kind face serious. He held a small, worn Bible, though it seemed he was using it more for the ceremony of the thing than for the words. The entire valley, it seemed, was there. The Johnson family, their children bright-eyed, Josiah the trader, and the other ranchers who had stood with them in the yard. They were not guests. They were witnesses. James looked at Clara, his gray eyes, the ghosts finally chased from them, were clear and calm. He spoke first, his voice rough in the cold air. "I have no ring," he said. "I have no gold." "I do not need gold," she whispered. Chaska, who had been standing to the side, stepped forward. He held not a ring, but a single, long, supple thong of deer hide. He took James's left wrist. He took Clara's. He placed them one atop the other, her skin against his. "In the eyes of my people," Chaska said, his voice quiet but carrying in the dawn, "a knot is a promise, a thing that holds this." He began to wrap the leather thong, binding their wrists together. "Is the knot that does not break. It binds two spirits, not as owner, but as partners. You are bound." He pulled the knot tight. Their blood, their pulses, were pressed together. Moses cleared his throat, his voice booming with a gentle joy. "By the laws of this territory, and by the witness of these good folks, I ask you, do you, James Mackenzie, take this woman, Clara Whitmore, to be your wife, to build with, to stand with?" James never took his eyes from her face. "I do." "And do you, Clara Whitmore, take this man, James Mackenzie, to be your husband, to share the work, and the quiet, and the life?" "I do," Clara said, her voice sure and strong. "Then," Moses grinned, closing the book, "you are—" James did not wait for permission. He leaned in, his free hand cupping her face, his other hand still bound to hers by Chaska's knot. The kiss was real. It was not the desperate, recognizing kiss in the lean-to. This was a kiss of daylight. It was gentle. It was true. And it tasted of coffee and wood smoke and the promise of the morning. They did not have a honeymoon. The next day, there was work. But 2 days later, They rode north. James had a new horse, a sturdy bay bought from the Johnsons. They rode for hours, up into the high country, following a trail James had not taken in 3 years. The air grew thin. They reached the timber line, and there it was, the cabin, the place from the blizzard. It was smaller than her memory, hunched and sagging, half consumed by the mountain. They dismounted. The door hung on one hinge. James pushed it open. The smell of old, cold ash and mouse leavings. The small cot where he had laid her. The broken chair. "This place," James said, his voice rough. "It was a hunting shelter, but I hated it. It reminded me of her." "Of me?" Clara asked. "Of the ghost," he said. "The rich girl I saved. The life I could not have. The life that mocked mine." "And now?" she asked. He looked at her, at his wife, her face browned by the sun, her hands strong. "Now," he said, "it is just a place, a pile of wood." He had brought his axe, and he had brought something else, wrapped in a cloth. He unwrapped it. It was a stake, carved from the same bright pine as the sign for their house, and at the top, he had carved it, copying the design from her handkerchief. A hawk, its wings spread wide. He walked to the front of the cabin, to the place where he had pulled her from the snowdrift. He raised the axe, and, using the flat back, he drove the stake deep into the hard mountain earth. He stepped back, his hand finding hers. They looked at the marker. "You saved me, James," she whispered. "No," he said, his voice quiet, his hand gripping hers. "We saved each other." He looked at the hawk. "Chaska's grandmother, your mother, you, this place, it is all one story. To save one person, it is to save the whole world." The valley healed. The railroad, facing legal action from the territory and the Lakota Nation, had stopped. The tracks, the steel snake, had retreated, seeking an easier, though more expensive, pass to the south. Harlan and the gunmen were gone, taken by the law, disappeared into the territorial prison. Clara's school grew. The lean-to was too small. James and Moses, their hammers ringing in harmony, built a new structure. It was just one room, but it had bright windows and a solid floor. It stood halfway between the town and the ranch, a true meeting place. The books came. Clara had written one letter, not to her father, but to her mother's surviving family in Philadelphia, the ones who also had the hawk's blood. She had not begged. She had stated a need. 6 weeks later, a wagon arrived, loaded with crates, primers, slates, books of poetry, histories, atlases. There was no letter enclosed, just the books. Clara ran her hands over them, the smell of paper and glue. A perfume. She was independent, in honor. James's workshop thrived. His work, his joinery, became famous. His chairs were not just chairs. They were solid, beautiful, and true. He taught the Johnson boy, his new apprentice. "You see," he would say, holding up a mortise and a tenon. "You do not force it. You cut them to fit. You cut them true. You respect the wood. You do that, and they will hold. Tighter than any nail. Tighter than any glue. A good joint. It is a promise. It holds when the world tries to pull it apart." A letter did come. One. It arrived with Josiah, the trader. It was from Boston. The envelope was thick, expensive. Clara took it. She held it for a long time. James watched her from his workbench, but he did not speak. She sat on the porch. She opened it. It was not a long letter. It was 2 sentences. "I have been informed of your marriage. I have altered my will accordingly." A double. No apology, no anger, just accounting, the final closing of a ledger. Clara read it once. She looked at the signature. The man who had tried to own her. The man who had, by trying to break her, shown her how to be strong. She did not weep. She did not feel anger. She felt nothing. He was just a man, in a city, 1,000 miles away. He had no power here. She folded the letter. She did not burn it. She did not save it. She walked to the bin where she kept scraps for the stove, and she dropped it in. She no longer needed it. The seasons turned. The scarred land healed. New grass, bright and green, covered the place where the Johnsons' barn had burned. The trees they had planted by the new school, a mix of pine from James and fast-growing cottonwood from Chaska, put down roots. Chaska was now a bridge. He brought the Lakota children to the school. He sat on the town council, his quiet words of truth often cutting through the ranchers' loud arguments. He taught the children, all the children, the things that mattered: how to read the tracks of a fox, how to listen to the wind. He told them the stories of the hawk and of the buffalo, stories of freedom and respect. The valley was changing. It was not a railroad town. It was just a town. That evening, the first evening of the new autumn, Clara and James sat on their porch. The work was done for the day. His workshop was quiet. Her school books were put away. They sat side by side on the steps, not touching, just sharing the same air, the same view. The sun was going down, painting the high peaks in colors of fire and gold. He reached out and took her hand. His was rough, marked with wood and work. Hers was calloused, stained with ink. They fit. "You saved me," he said, his voice quiet. He was not talking about the blizzard. He was talking about the ghost. "And you saved me," she whispered, "from the steel, from the silence." He looked at her, his gray eyes soft in the twilight. "We saved each other." She leaned her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. They watched the sky. The house was quiet. The valley was quiet. The railroad was a distant, dying rumor. James looked at the home they had built, the new wall of the lean-to, the sign above the door, the schoolhouse in the distance, the grave on the hill he had finally been able to visit with peace. He looked at the woman beside him. She was not a possession. She was his partner. He knew, now, a truth as solid as the mountains. Value was not something you inherited. It was not something you found or were given. It was not gold or steel or a name. Value was something you built every day. With your own hands, you hammered it into place. You sanded it smooth. You cut it true. And you made it hold. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please leave a comment below to say hello, share your thoughts, and connect with other listeners. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to Wild West Tales, like this video, and give us a boost by hitting the hype button to help more people hear this story.